Thank you, Pastor. Thank you, Dr. Briley, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm delighted to be here this morning. I got up pretty early. I had an alarm set at 6. I waked up at 10 minutes till 6. It's amazing how that happens to me throughout my life so many times when I need to get up at 5 o'clock or get up at 6. A lot of times I could sleep to 7, but when I was coaching football, I got up at 6 every morning. I was at the office at 7 as a head coach on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesdays, and Thursday we get to go there on 8, and then Fridays we came in at noon because we had to work pretty well behind us. But nonetheless, beautiful drive up here to Johnson City, as it's always been. I came to one game at East Tennessee State way back, and I don't know when I was here, but I was back about the time I was in college or got through. But I've always loved this whole state, but I'm prejudiced, preferential toward Middle Tennessee, where I call that my roots. And it's beautiful, those rolling hills and the Highland Rim and Cumberland Plateau, and East Tennessee is just spectacular. And I've always loved recruiting up here when they had good football players to recruit, and playing the Johnson City Country Club and playing the wonderful club over at Kingsport on the Holston River. And I played in Greenville, and I've played in a lot of places in between those places, Morristown, Bristol, and recruited. And it's a spectacular country, and we're very fortunate to live in this part of the country. I could talk a long time, but I could wear you out. But I can tell a few stories, and I'm just going to talk a little bit talk some about my background and how I got to be where I am. And when I say that, it doesn't mean what a great place I am, or what I am living in a very fine town. But I've liked every place I've ever lived. But not to tell you how good I am, but to tell you what's happened to get me to where I was, that when I have done well, I know why I have done well. And when I've done badly, I know why we did badly. Sometimes it wasn't my fault, but if I made some mistakes personally, I know it was. I knew I couldn't blame it on my parents and my 4 younger brothers and my younger sister. I'm the oldest of 6. And I couldn't blame it on my dad, who was my father and my coach in high school, or Bowden White, the great coach of Tennessee that I played for, or the Neyland people that I played under, who were assistant coaches and signed by me. Harvey Robinson was our first 2-year coach. And I certainly can't blame Frank Brawls or the 2 people I worked for at Mississippi State, Wade Walker, who was athletic director and head coach when I took the job there. He was a great All-American at Oklahoma, played under Bud Wilkinson, one of the greatest coaches of all time. Oklahoma had 47 straight wins, the longest winning streak in American football history. Wade Walker helped start that. And unfortunately, he's in the early stages of Alzheimer's, and I haven't seen him probably in 20 years. But Paul Davis could coach. Mississippi State was a tough job, and that was a good experience for me. Tennessee is a lot bigger, a lot more money. And we had better tradition by far, but it was good to know what the other side of the world's like. Arkansas was winning big. They weren't when I went. They were 5-5 the year before I went there, but they won before that, but didn't have near the tradition Tennessee has. But Frank Brawls is a great coach, one of the greatest of all time. He is a football Hall of Fame coach. Bowden White, my coach at Tennessee, is not only a football Hall of Fame coach, he was a football Hall of Fame player at Tennessee as an All-American and captain in 1938. They were 10-0, beat Oklahoma in the Orange Bowl, ended up 11-0. And he was one of the great coaches in the country. And working for Brawls. And Brawls, interesting about the family tree. The family tree is very important. There are a lot of people who didn't have much of a family tree who have been very successful and done great without having the support of a good family, or maybe having some other traits about brain cells and stuff like that. And a lot of people are rich because their grandfathers are rich and their great-grandfathers are rich, and a lot of them didn't have much to do with it. But the original people had to be pretty smart, or some of them are probably crooked at the time. But to be frank with you, and you see what's happened in Wall Street throughout the years, a lot of us, I'm sure there are a lot of ethical, honest people in Wall Street, but there are a lot of crooks in Wall Street, and probably there always will be. And I'll get on a tangent. Politically, I'm going to mention a little bit about politics and a little bit about what's happening in our country today and about tolerance. But I'm going to start back kind of in the beginning. But when I took the Iowa State job, I'm going to mention about kneeling and about being a runt. My dad was a great athlete. He and I are about the same size. He could run, he could kick, he could pass, he could play defense, he could play basketball, he could play baseball. I got to see him play as a kid, baseball and basketball, because he was down in those little towns where I grew up. Lynchburg, Tennessee is where I was born and raised. In 1935, the year that they started the Heisman Trophy. Paul Hornung, who won the Heisman Trophy my senior year in 1956, was born in 1935. John Majors, the runner-up and the closest voting in history at that time, was born in 1935. And that's when the Heisman started. The first one was University of Chicago, and I know his name, but I can't think. Huh? Jay Berwinger, University of Chicago, back when they had Alonzo Stagg as head coach and had some wonderful teams. They were in what would now be the Big Ten. Now they're in Division III. They went non-scholarship. They dropped football for many years. But Hornung is the only player in football history who's ever won the Heisman on a losing team. Notre Dame was 2-8. We were 10-0. The national championship and the rankings were made before the bowl games in those days. So we were 10-0, and we got upset by Baylor in the Sugar Bowl. The most disappointing game in my whole college career, which was my last one. And I had one of my most disappointing game in high school happened to be against my former town. But Lynchburg is a little town of about 400 people. It has one stoplight in it. I lived 1 block from the square. My grandmother, Bobo, was a local operator. When there were 3 widows that worked around the clock at the telephone office. And if you call John Majors, you'd say, 96 Miss Bobo. Her name was Bessie Lawrence Bobo. Her maiden name was, anyway, her married name was Bobo. And my mother was John Elizabeth Bobo. I'm named after her and her daddy and his daddy. So their name was John E. Bobo, so my mother was named John E. Bobo, John Elizabeth Bobo, but she went by Elizabeth. But they called her up on the phone and said, Miss Bobo, is this Miss Hinkle, or who had 3 different ones? And one of them would sleep there a couple of nights a week around the clock. In Lynchburg, you didn't get many calls after 10 o'clock. But in case of emergency, they had to have the phone system. And she had earphones on, and she'd plug one plug out and put it in here, plug you up with me. Or sometimes she'd say, they'd call and say, Miss Bobo, I need to talk to Mr. Johnson. He said, well, he's out of town. He went to Fiesta Bowl today, and he won't be back till tonight. So everybody knows what's going on in a little town like that. But I was there when it was about 1946. I was about 11 years old. They put the stoplight up there right in front of my. That's the only street Main Street goes right through Lynchburg from Tullahoma and from Chevrolet. They kind of joined about 2 miles out, go through Lynchburg and go down to Fiesta Bowl, where you can branch off outside of town and go to Winchester. So I refer to Lynchburg and Huntland as the cultural capitals of lower middle Tennessee. Huntland still doesn't have a stoplight, but back to Lynchburg, after we'd all played football, my dad was a very successful high school coach and had a great career at Sewanee, University of the South, one of the great liberal arts schools in the country. And my dad never went to high school, never went to college. I'm going to tell you how he got to where he did and why a lot of that affected me. But now the main street used to be Poplar, went right across, right from Tullahoma, right on straight through, only one main street, and and Square was right down 1 block from me. Moore County Courthouse, smallest county in population at that time and the smallest county in area in Tennessee. 95 counties, our license plate was always 95. Nashville was number 1 because it was capital. Number 2 was Memphis, the biggest city. Number 3 was Knoxville and Chattanooga's 4. Okay, then it went on up in population. But now that main street, rather than be popular, it's called Majors Boulevard. And it was named after my entire family. My dad's success, and then I played at Tennessee. Fortunately, I had good coaching, good teammates, and I had a great career. And my brother Joe played at Florida State as a quarterback and safety man. We all played both ways. My brother Bill played at Tennessee both ways. He played the same position I did, single wing tailback and safety man. My sister Shirley Ann played high school basketball, was a cheerleader. And my brother Larry played for my dad at Sewanee, University of the South, and graduated from there and became a history teacher. And Bob, 8 years younger, became an All-American at Tennessee as the nation's leading punt returner and nation's leading pass interceptor. And he played also offense as a sophomore. When he played, you had specialization like today. You had offensive team, defensive team. When I'm with the next 3 younger brothers, we had to play both ways. There was no free substitution. So anyway, and they named it Majors Boulevard about 30 years ago. It's a great little town, and its spirits have traveled worldwide. It's the home of Jack Daniel's Distillery. There was the first legal distillery in the state of Tennessee. I believe the first legal in America, but anyway, it's the only one in Tennessee until George Dickel came in about 1960 or something like that. And it is worldwide. It is famous. It won the Paris Gold Medal in 1903, I believe it was. But I get back to Huntland and Lynchburg 2 or 3 times a year. It's good to be on both sides of the fence. It's not fun when it happens, but to play on some bad teams or be around some adversity. And I was telling Dr. Briley on the way up on the telephone, I said, adversity in the long run gives us some scar tissue, and if we're tough, we could hang in there, you'll bounce back. Now, traumatic situations are very, very somewhat different, but you got to hang in there. The worst thing that ever happened to me in my life and our entire family was when my third brother, I'm the oldest, Joe, Bill, played at Tennessee, as I mentioned, was coaching at Tennessee in 1965 at age 26, and he was a defensive backfield coach. He coached the punters. He was an outstanding triple threat. He played tailback at Tennessee, and in a single wing at Tennessee, you got to snap him center directly, kind of like the shotgun, but you had a fullback. We didn't have any wide receivers. And the tailback had to do all the passing, he had to do all the punting, and he did about 70% of the running. And he called plays in the huddle. There were no signal systems at that time. We also played defense, safety, full time, and returned punts and returned kickoffs. We were pretty busy people. And Bill was a triple threader and played defense. He was a wonderful player. And he was coaching there, and they tied Alabama. Doug Dickey's second year. I don't care much about mentioning his name, but they tied down at Birmingham. And Bill and they tied 7-7. Infamous play. A great player, Snake Stabler. You guys are too young. He was a great quarterback at Alabama and was a great pro quarterback. He's a pro Hall of Famer for the Oakland Raiders. And Houston Oilers too, didn't he? Yeah. Left-handed. And he was a sophomore. And we all make mistakes. This was a critical mistake. But he never made it again. 7-7 tie. Alabama's on Tennessee's 8 or 10 yard line on third down. And all you got to do is hit a chip shot, but that's not always easy. It looks like it's going to happen, but sometimes people miss them and get them blocked. Snake Stabler was in a hurry calling plays. That's when they might have been signaling at that time. I think they probably were, but they didn't signal for him to do the clock play. But he thought, wait a minute, it was fourth down, and he was thinking it was third down, so he got on the center and threw the clock play. Down the ball, that stops the clock. Well, it wasn't third down, it was fourth down, and the game was over. So they tied the game, a big tie for Tennessee. So they hadn't been doing very well against them. So they came back, and then Monday morning, Bill and 2 other coaches carpooled, and they picked him up about 4 or 5 blocks from his house. It was a railroad track, and there was no light crossing. It was just the white crossing and a little rise at the track. and a big freight train was coming through there about 90 miles an hour, about 15 or 20 miles over the speed limit. And evidently they were, who knows, they might have been talking about the game, but the driver didn't stop. And it killed all three of them. Bill instantly, and the coach in the front right seat. Bill was in the right rear seat, and the driver died the next day. So that's the worst thing that ever happened in our family, and ever happened to me in my life. The Tennessee situation happened when I was let go down there after my 3 most successful years in a row at the University of Tennessee. And my 29 years of coaching in 1989, 90, and 91 were the most successful I had in 3 years. And we went to the Cotton Bowl as SEC champions and won the Cotton Bowl, which was one of the 5 major bowls at that time, before the BCS. The next year we went to the Sugar Bowl, the Southeastern Conference champions, and beat Virginia, who was Atlantic Coast champions. We beat Arkansas, who was the Southwest Conference champions. The third year we went to the Fiesta Bowl, which is a BCS bowl game and is a major bowl game then. And we lost to Penn State, who had a very good team. They were champions of the East. Best 3 years of my whole life, and I had heart surgery about 2 weeks before the first game. And Bill Fulmer, who was my assistant head coach, he was the interim coach. They won the first 3 games. The team that we had prepared, and I as head coach, all during spring practice and the off season. And I as head coach of recruiting, along with a good assistant coach of recruiting, took over and they won the first 3 games. I came back. I'm a quick healer, fortunately. I've always healed quickly. And if I had to do it again, I think I might have waited 24 hours. But I was going to get a new 7-year contract to tell you about Doug Dickey and Joe Johnson and people like that. Joe Johnson happened to be the redneck president that was president of the university at the time. He's the Birmingham, nothing wrong with Birmingham and Southern, but he's an Alabama native. And the only thing that he ever did, and Ed Bowling wouldn't get up, was the former president before him. They couldn't make us talk for 5 minutes. Joe Johnson was basically telling Auburn jokes. And I respect Auburn, but it's kind of country town, but country folks. But I'm a small town boy, so that's a little bit hypocritical. I can't criticize small town boys or country folks because there are a lot of good country people that I love and respect. But I grew up right in the country, but I was a town boy. I worked on the farms, but anyway, I like to joke about Auburn. We know, and when Pat died, I had a good relationship. He was a good coach there. But anyway, they promised me a new 7-year contract. We're going to sign it before the season started. Well, 2 weeks before the season, I had this little pain in my chest. Well, back in June, and they did an angioplasty, cleaned out my arteries. 2 months later, right before the season, I had a little tinge right here in my collarbone area. I don't like the collarbones here, right in the top of your chest where that bone is. And just I was jogging every day between 2 days, and I said, well, I should have gone quicker about that thing in the chest, but I didn't have a heart attack. And I went over saw the doctor, and I didn't tell anybody except my wife and 2 or 3 of my top assistants in case I wasn't back the next day. I was going to leave practice an hour early on a Tuesday, go out and get a checkup because I wanted to make sure I was okay. And Doug Dickey came on the practice field about halfway through practice, said, your new contract will be on your desk at 8 o'clock in the morning. And I went over there and was examined. I didn't tell him I was going to the hospital because rumors are big about a governor or they're big about a Tennessee football coach. Not that I'm compared with a governor, but everybody wants to know about football. And they want to know about the gossip about the football coach or the governor or maybe the mayor here, whatever. But I didn't tell him because I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. I didn't know what's happening. I just told the 2 or 3 people if I wasn't back the next morning, here's what I want to do in practice and whatever. And people that were top aides of mine. So he said, okay. I said, good. It'll be signed by him and by the president and the vice president for finance. So I had no reason not to trust him. And things were going well. I hadn't had any run-ins with any of them. So lo and behold, they go over there and they tell me I've got to I should have heart surgery. I had blockage in 4 arteries after going through that angioplasty, which wasn't painful. But I said, well, how soon can we do it? I like to compete. I like to play golf. I like to play tennis. I love to play handball. If I got a toenail bothering me, I want it cut and maybe miss 2 or 3 days or a week or 2 weeks where I can get back and playing. So when I said, how soon can we do it? He said, I changed my schedule. The doctor said I can do it at 7 o'clock in the morning. I said, let's do it. If I'd have waited for 24 hours, I'd still be head coach at Tennessee because we were winning. But it didn't. They lied to me, and they never gave me that contract because Phil Fulmer was working on my jaw. I told people he was working on my back while the doctor was working on my chest. And I guarantee you right now he's trying to get the AD's job at Tennessee, but I doubt he'll get it in case of whatever you read in the papers. Okay, so I came back very quickly in 3 weeks, and he told Dick. I saw Dick and Hall one day. He said, "We'll sign the contract." I didn't ask him about the contract for 2 or 3 weeks. I was already back working. I wanted to get back to work. I had no reason to think I wasn't going to get my contract. Most important thing to me was to coach the team, and I'm healing. Got back there. So about 2 or 3 weeks later, I passed him in the hall, and he said, "Have you thought any more about your contract?" I said, "No. We made agreements that I'd like to sign it whenever we get a chance." And he says, "We'll sign it after you have success or at the end of the season." He didn't say if you had success or at the end of the season. Well, we lost 2 or 3. We lost to Alabama, 14-7. They were national champs. We lost to Arkansas in the last play of the game on a 45-yard Hail Mary pass, and we lost to South Carolina. They went for 2. We went for 2 and didn't make it, 21-20. But we won the last 3 games, so we ended up with success, and we were 8-3. 8-3 after 3 of my 3 best years of my life. 8-3. We still got the bowl bid at Papa John Bowl or something there in Tampa, which is a good bowl, but it's not a main bowl. Those are the type bowls that Fulmer went to the last 8 years of his career. You know, they went to one BCS bowl, I believe, in his last 10 years. We'd gone to 3 in a row. So anyway, things changed after we lost 3 games, but then we won the last 3. And I was informed before the third of the last game, Memphis State, that I couldn't coach there anymore, that I could stay on as assistant athletic director, with 2 cars and $150,000 a year. I said, I couldn't work for you all after you lied to me. You think I could be in the press box with Joe Johnson and Doug Dickey and Ed Bowling, who's retired? He was a part of it too, but be up with the people that lied to you. I couldn't do that. He said, well, you know what your choice is, don't you? I said, yeah. It's either you fire me or either fire or take your position. I said, okay, you can. I said, I want to. He said, when he said that, do you want to be an assistant athletic director? I said, no, I want my quarterback and my team. I very rarely ever use that term, my team or my quarterback. It's our team. It's the Tennessee team. It's the Tennessee quarterback. I very rarely use it, but I said, I want my quarterback. So Heath Schuler was a sophomore. We only had 1 senior who was drafted that year. And he was a first-round draft choice defensive end. I'll think of it in a minute, but we'll keep moving on. So that's how I ended up at Tennessee. That was very traumatic. That's probably the most traumatic thing, but besides my brother Bill's death. But it was, fortunately, the University of Tennessee, University of Pittsburgh came to get me when I needed them. They also needed me, to be frank with you. That's immodest. Pittsburgh needed me both times. We didn't have great success the last time, but the first time we did. Well, going up in Lynchburg, and I didn't return to Tennessee for any ball game except when our team was honored that I played on. This will be our 55th reunion this year. We were number 2 in the country, undefeated, untied. I always came back for them because I respected my teammates, and I loved playing with them. And but I didn't come back to watch Phil Fulmer coach or be around Doug Dickey. And I came back when our former players that played for me were honored. Those 3 straight teams that won, 2 of them won the conference. We had a combined reunion for them. I came back for that because I didn't want the players to think that I didn't care for them, because I did, and I wanted to see them. But those were great days. I came back for the 1985 reunion, the great Sugar Vols that upset Miami. We won the conference in 1985 and beat them on New Year's Day, 35-7. Great bunch of people. That's probably the one team in my whole career that's the most memorable as far as reaching its. I don't believe in 105%. I believe when you give 100%, or the 100% is produced, that's 100%. But a lot of coaches use that term, 105. We want to give 110%. Give me 100. You very rarely can get that from anybody. On certain occasions, at certain plays, it's probably personally inhumane, even though a guy like Nick Saban's going to be out there about 100% of the time. He can coach. And Tennessee's got a new good football coach, Derek Dooley. He's going to do the job. And they've got a good, I think, I'm impressed with what I hear about the basketball coach. Lynchburg and Huntland, Lynchburg has about 450 people, one stoplight. Huntland, they say has about 1,000. When my dad moved us over there in my sophomore year, they had 300 people. As you go into Huntland, it's off the main highway from Memphis to Chattanooga, Highway 64, 1 mile south, 5 miles above the Alabama line. Little farm hamlet right at the very foot, half a mile or a mile from where the Cumberland Plateau goes into Alabama. Beautiful. It's right on the Highland Rim, which is nice farmland, but right butts right into the mountains, and you got a lot of loggers there, some moonshiners, and some tough people in those mountains. And quite a, I don't know, professor, whether it's dichotomy, but it's a contrast of some nice, really wonderful, sweet-natured, hard-working farm people in that Highland Rim, which is very fertile country, great farmland, and you got these other people. My dad started the first football team Huntland had in 1949. He was a great athlete in high school. Could do all those things that he taught us to do, and he could do it naturally, and we were natural. I'd say he's the best athlete of the bunch of us, but he didn't have a chance to go to college. He was a barber to get off the farm, married my mother who lived in Lynchburg, and we were all born in my grandmother's house, the first 5 of us. 5 of us in 6 years and 2 days' time. My mother and daddy knew how to make them. It looks like they found out how to make kids, but I'm not sure they knew how to stop it. So, and I told Larry turned 70 May 23rd, and I turned 76 May 21st, 2 days before his birthday. I said, he's the first one I remember being born. And I said, Larry, you're the last dad blame thing we needed is a baby in our house. But I said, the day you were born, our dad came in and said, John, Bill, Joe, you got a new little brother. So it was May 23rd, and we all went barefooted in the summer, no shirts, no shoes, and shorts. We played in shorts. And I said, I went out the back door and never forget, there's dew on the ground. He waked us up kind of early and ran down, knocked on every door on the main street. There were about 5 houses besides ours. I said, I got a new little brother. Run down, I got a new little brother. I said, Larry, you're the last damn thing we needed is a new brother. I said, we had 5 of us, already had 4 of us, and we needed all the ice creams and Coca-Colas we could get. We didn't get but 1 or 2 a week. But anyway, it all worked out. And my dad was barbering in World War II. Tell you about coaching and teaching. Whether it's a college professor. When I've done well, I know why. I had unconditional love from my parents. And my brothers and I are like that, all 6 of us, and my sister. We're like that. You got to fight one of us, you're going to fight us all. I had that great support of the family. We had fun. We got to play about 95% of the time. Well, we had to work in the garden in the summer, and once we got a little bit older, 6th, 7th graders, so we started setting tobacco 2 or 3 days a year with the farmers. When I got in high school, I hauled hay, combined, worked in a feed mill and a flour mill just to make extra money because I like money. And making $20 a week or $18 a week, working 6 days a week full from the farm, a lot better than having nothing. And I learned to work. And I like to play more. So anyway, my dad was barbering in Tullahoma when I was about 8 years old. And Lynchburg gave up football one year in the war years, World War II. We've had a lot of wars, but that was a biggie. And I remember a lot about it. And my dad was barbering. He'd go back and forth every day to Tullahoma with a mail car, take his old car. And Lynchburg wanted to redo for we had to bring it back up, and the players went to see the principal. He said, we can't afford a coach, and said that most of the men are in the Army, but there's something called 4F for you young people. 4F meant that you were classified unable to be in the armed forces. And physically you could be disqualified for several things, but flat feet would disqualify you, and high blood pressure. My dad was only 28 years old with 5 kids. He was disqualified because 4F, he was made 4F because he had high blood pressure and flat feet. And a lot of people were disqualified because they were working in maybe an important plant in Oak Ridge, or working in places making armaments, and women, because women weren't in the service at that time. And a lot of them were disqualified because they had to work on the family farms, because we needed food for soldiers and needed food for our citizens. He coached. They asked him to coach. My dad barbered during the daytime with 5 kids at that time. Rode back with the mail carrier, coached the team that night without a playbook, nothing on paper, without an assistant coach, strictly teaching what he was taught in high school by his high school teacher, and taught him football, basketball, and baseball. That's how he started. He went to Huntland my freshman year, back and forth. He drove back and forth every day because he had 6 kids by that time. His former high school principal had got him back in high school to come back because he quit his senior year. He came back and he knew he could win a lot of games by scoring touchdowns and shooting basketball. So he got him back in high school, and 17 years later hired him as head coach at Little Huntland High School. It doesn't have a stoplight. It's a little county school. The little town had 300 people. He started from scratch. They were 2 and 5 the first year. He moved us over there the first week of my freshman year, my sophomore year. We won the first 25 games and lost 1 game to Lynchburg my senior year, where I'd come from, my former town. The next 4 years, Joe, Bill, and Larry played on 4 teams that went 40-0-1. My dad's teams won 71-1. We were the winningest team in the state of Tennessee. They had no classifications because we couldn't have played Kingsport. We couldn't have come close to beating them. With no classification, but in small schools, we were by far the best team in the state. And he went to the University of the South for 21 years. He was a builder, and he came up, he didn't have it hard coming up. He had that little farm he came off of, that strictly subsistence, plowing mules, and had a couple of hogs to kill for food. But he was a competitor, and he knew basic fundamentals, and he knew football, basketball, and baseball. He was our head coach in all 3 sports, and we played a year round. We never stopped playing. We didn't have golf courses or tennis courts in those 2 little towns. We went to Sewanee. Sewanee had not had, they won 2 games in 3 years at the university. Division III school, no scholarships. They were 2 and 5, they were 5 and 4 the first year, won 5, lost 4. The next year they were undefeated and untied for the first time in the 20th century. Stayed there 21 years, had the only 2 undefeated teams in Sewanee history in that 20th century. And my brother Larry played there for the undefeated team in '63. So I played for a tough, demanding coach in high school and grew up at his feet and on his knee and sit up in his lap. He was competitive. He told us as youngsters, boys and Shirley, you don't have to play to please me, but if you're going to play, I expect you to give it all you got. I expect to give it all you got. And he expected nothing less. He had a fierce, short temper, but fortunately it didn't last long. But he meant what he said, and he said what he meant. I've told our players, our staff, you say, if a coach tells a player, break down. When I tell a player, break down. Barry Bryant would do that. He's a big Barry Bryant fan. The professor was a big Barry Bryant fan. But Barry Bryant didn't waste time. Neither did Shirley Majors, that's my dad's name, Shirley. And neither did Bowden White. They said something, you better do it right then. And you save a lot of time. If you have to wait for a break, that takes about 2 or 3 seconds. You save those 2 or 3 seconds. Time is of the essence. You need to use your time in high quality, whether you're running a business or whether you're running a classroom or whatever you are. I guarantee you, doctors need every minute they get. They need more minutes than what they've got. Football coaches needed more minutes than what we got. We worked 7 days a week, and a lot of times my basic hours were 7 o'clock in the morning to 10 at night. On Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. Thursday night, I went home. And Friday, I had dinner with my wife, and she made the trips with us, or I did with her. My kids are friends that came to town. Running a business is organization. Make the least of what is gone and the most of what's to come. That's hard to do a lot of times. It's hard to put that last victory behind you. You know, people say, "Oh, that was a good game." You still like to talk about beating Alabama or beating Nebraska if you're playing in a bowl game. But that's okay in a bowl game. You can talk about it longer. But you can't talk about it long. And if you lose, it's hard to get that out of your system. Dad blame loss. If we'd have only done this, or Dad blame we hadn't done this fumble. But the sooner you get that adversity out of the way, or put the past glories out of the way, if you're in sales, somebody's going to be out there working on, if you were gloating a little longer than your last big sale, having breakfast a little longer, having a couple of cocktails a little longer, somebody's out there cutting into what you're trying to get done. And something I've always, even though football is a team sport, basketball, baseball, I love golf and tennis. They're pretty much individual sports. But I love the team sports better. I love to be a part of the unit. 5 men on basketball on every play, but in football, it's got to be every play. Sometimes in fast break, there'll be 3 guys going downfield, 3 on 2 or 3 on 1 with a fast break, making basketball layups, and the other 2 can kind of jog behind. 11 men on every play is essential every play in football. You've got to start in the right direction, and you've got to start with the right foot, correct foot that is, and be in unison, come off on the snap at the same time. If you don't, your chances of having a bad play are built up. If it is to be, it is up to me, even though this is our team, a team game, because I'll tell you why. If a right guard has the desire to be the best practice player on that team, and the tailback has the desire to be the best practice player on that team, and the assistant coach that's working on that position, if I'm the defensive backfield coach, which I coached, and I also coached offensive backs at different times, if I'm the defensive backfield coach, and I've got, well, it's about, a lot of times we had 12 coaches, sometimes 14 or 16, but varsity coaches, basically we had 6 varsity coaches. The head coach, 6 varsity coaches, 3 for offense, 3 for defense, and a B team coach and a freshman coach. But those things have changed, but you still have a defensive backfield coach, offensive line coach, maybe a couple of them, and defensive line coach, and a linebacker coach. If that's a competitive group, and they're intelligent, and they want to succeed, and they want to beat you, if every one of those people says, my team's going to have a better practice day than Coach Briley's is. Or Charlie Coffey, my teammate that I played with at Arkansas. He's a line coach at Arkansas. He played with at Tennessee. He was a defensive line coach at Arkansas, and I was defensive backfield coach for a couple of years. He was very competitive, and so am I. He's fierce. I believe I am too. I wanted my defensive backs to impress Coach Brawls more than I wanted Charlie's team to impress him. Even though I'm a team man, I wanted to beat my competition on that team. And I am a team man, and I love being a team man. I was very unselfish in calling plays. I gave the ball to the fullback inside the 5-yard line more than I took it. I had my share of the glory of running, passing, scoring, and punting. But Tommy Bronson, a great blocker and a wonderful fullback, didn't get a chance to run the ball as much as I did or throw it. When we got inside the 5, he was more powerful also. I gave him the ball more than I took it, but I took it a lot of times down there if I thought we needed it. I wanted him to get some glory because he blocked for me. He's a team guy. Well, I'll tell you this honestly. I didn't want Charlie Coffey to beat me, even though we were on the same side of the line of scrimmage with his players looking better than mine. And I had 2 good understudies at UT as tailbacks. Bobby Gordon and Al Carter were very good athletes, good players. And I knew Bobby Gordon wanted to beat me out so badly he couldn't stand it. And Al Carter didn't have quite the desire, but Al Carter was tough. He had great ability. And I never let up. And to be frank with you, selfishly, I didn't want them to look that good when they got in the game. I wasn't hoping they'd make a great run. I wanted to win, and I'd have been pleased if he made the winning run to have won it. But I'd rather been the one to do that. So that's selfish in some ways. But I read some of these people now on TV and some of these college players, and I really respect them. They say, the guy's name is George Thomas, and he's a starter. He said, well, you know, Joe Wilson took my place, and I was telling him what to do. Well, I would help somebody win the game. But a lot of them are really very close and try to help a young guy do well. I probably wouldn't. We didn't have much chance to do that time because it wasn't as complicated as it is today about calling plays. Enough of that. But competition is important. If you're on the staff, on a team, want to be better than the other guy and try to outdo him with your effort. Same way in sales, whatever you're doing in business. Bowden White, who I played for in college, General Neyland signed us, as the professor said. And he talked about, a lot of people didn't think I was big enough to play. This has a little bit to do with that. But I was recruited by a lot of people, even that little high school only had 32 in our graduating class. I was recruited by Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, Kentucky, West Point, Virginia, Virginia Tech, Florida, Georgia, and Auburn. Alabama didn't come out to me, and then neither did a few more in the Southeastern Conference, but Arkansas did, and Wyoming contacted me because Bowden White was head coach at Wyoming. One day he built a program there after World War II. They never had a decent team in the history. Bowden White had 2 championship teams his 5th and 6th year there. He went from there to Arkansas. They'd been losing. They won 2 games and lost 8 the first year. Second year, they won the Southwest Conference and lost to Georgia Tech in the Cotton Bowl. He came to Tennessee. General Neyland signed our class. We were the last class to sign under General Neyland. If you want to think about competition, they signed over 100 freshmen that year. There were no limitations. And we had some walk-ons, too, that came in on their own. 100 of us showed up. 4 years later, there were only 18 of us left. The survival of the fittest. General Neyland retired 2 months after we signed it. We signed in December, and he retired in February. He kept the same staff. He was athletic director also. He kept all the staff, and every one of them had played for him in college. But the main offensive coach, Coach Harvey Robinson, coached the backs and the punters. He moved him up the head coach. So we played for the Neyland staff the first 2 years. Coach Ward Robinson was a smart, wonderful man, great human being, smart football coach. He wasn't a great leader, a natural leader, but he was intelligent, and it was a tough job to succeed a so-called legend like Neyland. So first year he was 5-5. The second year he was 4-6. So General Neyland fired him. And Harvey Robinson played for him and coached for him, but those things you have to do sometimes. Brought in Bowden White, who'd only been in Arkansas 2 years. We were 6-3-1 his first year. The next year we were 10-0. He's the only coach in football history going back to 1869. First game was between Rutgers and Princeton, first United States football game, officially. He's the only coach in history that's ever won 3 different championships in 3 major conferences. Wyoming was in the old Skyline, which was Arizona State, Arizona, Brigham Young, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado State. And then Arkansas had Texas A&M. That was the old Southwest Conference. And of course, we had the Southeastern. So I had good training. And that's when I couldn't do something well. If I made a mistake or I didn't make a good tackle, it wasn't because I wasn't taught well. I was coached well. You have to be carefully taught, and I'm very appreciative of that. Frank Broyles, the head coach at Arkansas, he knew offense, defense, and kicking. He played for Bobby Dodd, a great Tennessean who's from Kingsport. Bobby Dodd and Bowden White, who I played for, and against Coach Dodd, played for General Neyland. They both are 2 of the only 3 people in the history of the game who are in the College Hall of Fame as a player and coach. Alonzo Stagg is the third one. He coached till he was 95 years old, I guess. And I had a good fortune of playing for Coach White against the biggest game that had ever been played at Georgia Tech in 1956 at Atlanta. 2 Hall of Fame coaches, Bobby Dodd, Georgia Tech, Bowden White for Tennessee, who had played under Neyland. White's from Kingston, Tennessee. Bobby Dodd's from Kingsport. And we beat Georgia Tech 6-0. They were number 2. We were number 3. We beat them in Atlanta. And the next week, we were number 1 for 1 week, outpolled Oklahoma. But Oklahoma was defending national champions. They ended up 10-0 that year, moved back into first place. We were 10-0. We got outvoted. They didn't have the BCS playoff. It was all but the polls. It was done before the bowl game. Army and Navy and the Air Force have got something that everybody doesn't have. You got a lot of people that go to civilian universities or state universities or whatever, private schools. Got it in the heart and the guts. Football probably is a release and fun period because all that regimen they have to go through with their academics and their discipline and all this stuff. Coaching at the academies, I think, would be a real, I'm going to say luxury, but a really enjoyable, very rewarding experience because those people don't have to be told things very many twice, maybe not hardly ever twice. And they're going to give you everything they got. One of my favorite things I've ever seen. I've been to Kentucky Derby many times. And I'm saying, I'm not trying to impress you, but I like living. I want to see it all. I don't want to see a lot of trash. I don't want to see a lot of vulgarity, but I want to see it all. And I stay busy, and I've got a lot of energy. But I've been to the Kentucky Derby many times. I had a box up there for many years. I've been to the Indianapolis one time, which I never cared for car racing. I'm telling you, I saw the closest races in history when John Cock beat Mears. What about 1982 or something like that? It's a lot of great events. I always wanted to see the Army-Navy game because I couldn't see it in person while I was coaching. But I watched it every time I had a chance because they normally played after our last game with Vanderbilt. When I stopped coaching at Pittsburgh in 1996, my brother Joe and I, we used to be little boys. We were Blanchard and Davis. When 44 and 45 and 46, West Point never lost a game because that's the end of the war years. 4 years, that's World War II. 44 and 45, we were still right in the last part of the war, but 44 was fierce battling, and also in 45 and against Japan. And we always listened to Army. We'd listen to Tennessee, and we'd listen to Vanderbilt because we lived south of Nashville. But Army was our favorite team. They had 2 Heisman Trophy winners in the same backfield. Doc Blanchard won it as a fullback in 44. Glenn Davis, the tailback or halfback, won it in 1945. So we'd argue who was going to be Blanchard and Davis. Well, normally I won because I was the oldest. And I was also, we played war games. I was always America, and Joe and Bill were Germany or Japan. Except when I'd blend Glenn Davis 3 days in a row, and Joe would be Doc Blanchard. Bill would say, I'm not going to play unless I can be Glenn Davis or Doc Blanchard. And Bill he had a strong mind. And I said, no, you beat Columbia, or you beat Penn, University of Pennsylvania, and the Army beat the heck out of them. And we were Army. But he said, I'm not going to play. So, okay, so we'd relent. And I was always American. We were playing war games with our toy guns, in our helmets. And they were Nazis, except I'm not going to beat Germany today. When they threatened me, well, we'd play against each other. I'd beat Germany on occasion. But those people, we went against them. My first game against them as a head coach was at Pittsburgh, my first year in 1973. We were above average. They hadn't had a winning team in about 15 years. They hadn't been to a bowl game in 17 years. But we go 6-3-1, and 6-3 or 6-4-1. We played Navy at home, and I had so much respect for them. And I told our players, I said, we probably got a little bit of athletes, but I'm going to tell you something. You're going to play against a team that's going to give you more of everything they've got than anybody you'll probably play all year. Well, lo and behold, we go up 17-0 the first half. We go in at halftime. I said, I'm going to tell you something. Those guys are fighting us. We're playing very well. They're fighting their guts out. Don't think that they're going to lay down. They're going to come right back after us. Well, next thing you know, about 3.5 minutes left in the game, they threw a pass and kicked the extra point, tied us 17-17. We went about 80 yards in 3 minutes and won the game with 25 seconds to go. Next year, we go, and George Welsh was the coach. George Welsh played at Navy as a quarterback. He's a year ahead of me in college. And, literally did a wonderful job as head coach at his alma mater, Navy. So he was coaching when I was at Pittsburgh when we played him that game I'm talking about. Next year we go to Navy. And next year we go to Navy. And I've told in the public, I say, George Welsh is an outstanding coach. He does a good job. So the first year we beat him the last minute. I said, George, you do a heck of a job. Good luck to you after the game. And then the next year, we had to kick a 52-yard field goal to beat them at 11-10 at Annapolis. Very impressive place. They've got this stadium. It probably has about 45, 50,000. And all the way around it, it's got Tarawa. It's got Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Chateau Thierry, World War I. Many of the famous battles engraved at the top of that stadium all the way around. It's a complete circle. It's a very impressive place to play. And so I told George after the game, I said, George, your players played like heck, man, and you do a heck of a job. And I would say it publicly before the game and after the game about what a good coach he was and how hard Navy plays. And he said, John, that's easy for you to say. You've beaten us the last 2 years. So the next year, we scored the first play from scrimmage at Pitt State. Tony Dorsett went 73 yards from scrimmage, and they called it back. They called it on our right guard, Ed Kocharik. And I looked at that film, 25. I couldn't see a finger twitch, honest to gosh. I think it was a Big East official trying to get himself a letter. He might have known George Welsh, but anyway, we got inside the 15. I'm sorry to admit this, but we got inside the 15 like 2 or 3 other times and fumbled or threw an interception. Nothing. Middle of the third quarter, had a great strong safety, was just inducted to the Hall of Fame. This is 1975. Chet Moeller was a great strong safety, just been inducted to the College Hall of Fame this past December. Chet Moeller was a heck of a player. Boy, he was tough. He could play pass defense. He would knock your rear end off. He intercepted the pass and ran it back about 65 yards for a touchdown, 7-0. They beat us 17-0. End of the game, I was very disappointed because we had better players, and I'm disappointed to say that we messed it up and got a bad call, number one. But then we also should have scored when we were down there. I walked out to midfield. I said, George, I still say you're a hell of a coach. So we'd beaten him, but he beat me. And he's a very quiet, he's not much of an outgoing guy, but once you know him, he's got a pretty good sense of humor. Okay, so that's what. Anybody have any questions? Yeah. No, don't ever forget about Bobby. I know Bobby Bowden very well. I also knew. I've got 3 or 4 pretty good ones about Bill Peterson and Tom Nugent, because my brother Joe played for Tom Nugent and somebody else. Okay, back about Brown and Board of Education. That was Kansas, right? It's about the segregation issue when the Supreme Court ruled that the public schools in America would not be segregated, separate but equal, they called it. The black schools didn't have the facilities, and they got a lot of hand-me-down stuff, so it wasn't separate and equal, but we were segregated. And in the South, in Southeastern Conference, I never played against a black player, and I never coached. We never had a black player at Mississippi State, Tennessee, Arkansas, and that didn't mean, and that was wrong. Plain and simple, that was wrong for history, but that's another story. But a very important story. But I wasn't involved with the segregation that came around. I believe that was a 1955 ruling, or 57 is when they had the Arkansas integrated Central High School. That was a big thing. They had to send the National Guard in. That's the one date I know of the year, I'm pretty sure. And the first black person I coached was when I became head coach at Iowa State. And it was the first question I was asked after I got through, because they knew where I'd come from. And I played with black kids. We didn't have, Lynchburg only has about 3% black on one road right at the end of the town. And we have several friends. It's easy to say my best friend's Italian or my best friend's black. You know, it's maybe some way to somebody to be convinced by me or by somebody says that they're not prejudiced. Well, and I hope I'm not. I'm sure I have been at times, but not about the blacks overall. Once I got an adult and started relating with them, but we had great friends when I was a kid, and I loved. and my dad and mother. But okay, first question I was asked, Coach Majors, how are you going to handle the black players? And it was now African Americans. And I said, well, I don't know at this point, but I plan to do everything, and I plan to do everything in my power to handle them like I do anybody else. If they do well and hustle, I'm going to pat them on the rear or pat them on the back and say, way to go. And if they don't, then I'm going to get after them and demand that they give us effort. And I've made every effort to do that. I can't say that I've been perfect, but that's very conscious to me. And I use some words on the practice field that I shouldn't have, probably sometimes some little curse words. I mean, I've used the D word and the S word sometimes, and I'm not proud of, but I never referred to a person refer negative to their ancestry. SOB, or nobody even thinks about the F word. Nobody used that word when I was growing up. And my dad wasn't a big cursor. He would say, damn, hell, shit, if he was upset, but he wasn't a vulgar man. He wouldn't tell a vulgar joke, didn't like vulgar jokes. I don't like vulgar jokes. And I certainly don't like racist jokes. I know, and people start telling me about a racist joke, and I don't, I said, I don't need to hear that, or either I don't acknowledge it. I'm not going to laugh and hee-haw. So that was the start of it. Now I think about all the wonderful African Americans I've coached. Not many. I don't know if I've ever had an Oriental player, maybe one or two, but I've had some Hispanics and others. Bobby Bowden is a terrific person. He's somewhat of a preacher, and he's a great salesman. He's a natural. Bobby Bowden's very natural. He's got a good sense of humor. And players liked him, and he was a very good coach when he was younger. The older he got, like Joe Paterno, they didn't do much coaching, and their teams didn't do as well, to be frank with you. There's a time that they needed to move on. Paterno's still coaching, but he's not very effective. All the assistants are doing the work. And but Bobby Bowden told a good story. At the Hall of Fame, when he was inducted, he and Paterno were the oldest coaches, one more than anybody else. Paterno's still trying to coach. So he said he was at the Waldorf Astoria the first time he was coaching at West Virginia. And he's got a good sense of humor. He said he was at the Waldorf Astoria with his wife, and they were coming out of the hills of West Virginia. Bobby grew up in Alabama. He's a Southern boy. He's got a lot of confidence, but he plays the modest country boy deal, even though he grew up in Birmingham. And he says, my wife and I checked in this big fancy Waldorf Astoria. We ain't never seen anything like that before. We get up there, but that's right during the Watergate times. You all probably know what Watergate was in the Nixon investigation. And people were checking, they were just suspicious of cameras and whatever. And so we no sooner got in the room, and Ann, his wife said, Ann says, Bobby, you need to check to see if this is security, or see if there's anything in here that could record what we're doing or whatever. He said, oh, Ann, I said, what do you think that happened? I said, well, you never know about Watergate and all this suspicious stuff. So he says, I go around the wall and lift up the rugs, and I go on my hands and knees and go around and lift up the carpet and said, can't see anything, you know. And she said, well, you check the ceiling. So I got a chair, got up there and got up and looked around, didn't see anything. And there's a big chandelier in the middle. So he called for the local, what do you call handyman? They brought him the ladder. So I even got up on that ladder and checked to see if there's anything inside of the chandelier. So he said, I unscrewed a couple of screws and thought I'd loosened a couple of screws and said I went back to bed. No, I ain't everything's okay. Next day, he said, we go down to check out, and it says, the guy asked him, says, everything okay, Mr. Bowden? Oh, yes, sir, sure it was. Why did you ask? We were very busy. Why did you ask? I said, well, the people out below you had a chandelier fall on them last night. He hooked us in. I'll tell you three or four human inner stories you might be interested about Dorset and Horning and me. And my mother could handle anything. Talk about handling adversity. It's easy to be a front runner and a good winner. But it takes class. Well, class can be over you, but it takes confidence and takes some etiquette to be a decent loser. Not bad mouthing or making excuses or whatever. Sometimes there are reasons why you lose, and maybe the team is not responsible for it. You could get a bad officiating call or two. And I haven't always liked it. Okay, some of the calls. But when I was growing up, we didn't have any money, but we had a great life. We had everything we needed. Plenty to eat, a warm bed to sleep in. You know, Joe and I slept in the same bed, and Larry and Bill slept in a bunk bed, all in the same room. And we only had one extra bedroom, and Miss Shirley Ann slept in a little middle room. But the point is, we had everything we needed. We always had an old car, but my dad and mother always had to rent until they went to Sewanee. Well, after I was out of college, they had their first house built. We had balls, we had bats, and a lot of times we used to put that, when we splinter them, we'd put nails in them and tape them up and put a black tape around it. And we stuffed footballs and stuffed stuffed footballs and played with all kinds of balls. We'd make something happen. But our dad normally could come up with a decent ball because he was around coaching. Before he coached, he was doing umpiring, refereeing in basketball and football. So he'd come up with baseballs. Okay. We had everything we needed. We played all the time. And but my mother and daddy I never heard them say, "Oh, Elizabeth, how are we going to handle this?" Or Shirley, what are we going to do now? If we wanted something and they didn't have the money to do it, didn't have the means to do it, they said, "No, John, you don't need that now." They never said, "We don't have the money, we can't afford that." You don't need that. They didn't lie to us. Good luck to you. But the most disappointing game in my life was the last game I played. I wasn't a fumbler, but I fumbled on occasion. Dorsett wasn't a fumbler. So we led 7-6 up to the middle of the fourth quarter. I scored the only touchdown. I carried the ball 7 straight times and scored from about the 8 or 10 yard line. We were moving the ball very well in the fourth quarter, and we had our starting guard, who was my teammate, my classmate, Bruce Burnham, was blocking a guy scrambling, a linebacker named Larry Hickman. Larry Hickman kicked him in the head. He went into convulsions, and we thought he was dying. And they took him off the sideline to the side. They stopped the game for at least 10 or 15 minutes. Took him to the hospital, and they gave him last rites on the sideline. So after the game, I don't know. Now we didn't finish the drive, and ended up punting. They got the ball back and forth. We did. They punted to us about 8 to 10 minutes to go in the game, and I handled a punch. I ran the ball, I caught it on the 8, ran it about the 13-yard line. They hit me, 2 or 3 of them did, and I dropped the ball. They took it in and scored and beat us 13-7. Well, I wasn't thinking about that. Was the time I'm disappointed, but I'm still playing, so I'm active. You know, you don't have to. Oh my God, why did I do that? Oh, I wish you're thinking about the next play. Well, after the game, we found out Bruce Burnham was going to be okay, and I very rarely use the word devastated. Devastating is like in Joplin, Missouri, or the tornadoes, or something that's terrible. Well, a lot of things are we call it back-breaking. But I was really, after the game, I was really low, really down. I could always bounce back, but I was really low. I'd bounce back always, but at that time I was low and disappointed. Could have won all 11. And I came out the door, and my mother says that she told me when I came out, I didn't say anything about my farm. I said, "Mother, Bruce is going to be okay." Now, well, that was how much I was interested in him, but I still am disappointed. They asked my mother, the guy from the man, F.M. Williams, who covered Tennessee from the Nashville, Tennessee, and covered Tennessee for many years, the main one, and he asked my mother. He had a nice, soft Georgia brogue. It wasn't hickey. It was a nice Southern. Frank Broyles is from Georgia. He's got a very wonderful brogue and accent. He said, "Mrs. Majors," he said, "did you have anything to say about John's famo?" My mother was 4 feet 10.5 inches tall, competitive. She's a school teacher. She was an artist. She could play the piano. She could do sew and knit. She made a lot of our underwear for my dad and my brothers. How she did it all, and dresses of her and Shirley Ann with 6 kids and teaching school. Amazing woman. Tough in the clutch. She and my dad never talked about they had a temper, both of them, but never made excuses. And there was a reason, but maybe not an excuse. And she says, and she always wore a fancy hat and high-heeled shoes because she's 4 feet 10 and a half, high-heeled shoes, and always had a nice dress. FM said, Mrs. Majors, do you have anything to say about John's fumble? Well, no, FM. Even I burned the biscuits on occasion. That's a fact. And she'd cook hundreds of biscuits. And people all over Tennessee now tell me if they're 50, 60, 70 that saw that game on TV or read the paper, they'll say, hey, your mama said she burned the biscuits too, didn't she? Well, Coach Bryant was one of the, I thought he and Bowden White, who I played for, my dad had a lot of similarities. They were impressive looking men physically, and they both had fierce eyes, look in their eye. If they looked at you, you know you better get your butt straight, man. They never had to worry or say a lot. But Coach Bryant had one of the greatest snacks. My dad had some good sayings that would come up just out of his mind. They both came from subsistence farms. The first trip they made into town, you got a picture of Coach Bryant on his dad with his dad on a wagon going into the local town. He's from Monroe Bottoms. My dad's from Beach Hill, 126-acre rocky hillside farm, subsistence. You remember he took a wagon in 10 miles to Winchester. Said he the first time he ever drank a Coca-Cola. He was about 8 years old. Said it's the best thing he'd ever tasted in his life. And my dad always liked those little bottles of Coke. He could almost guzzle them. But Coach Bryant had a great knack for country humor and philosophy. And he had a great way of talking to players and coaches. He got your attention. And he had some really great motivational talent of his own, and I'm sure he thought about a lot of those things, but sometimes he didn't have to. But after we were playing them in 1980, we were making a little progress. 1977, we were 4-6. That's the first year. The next year, we were 5-1. 79, we went 7-4 and went to the Blue Bonnet Bowl game, making a little progress. 80, we had our best team at that point, and I made a big mistake, one I wish I'd never made. We were up 15-0 at halftime. Went for two when we had 15. Should have kicked the extra point. They stopped us, 2-point play. I was going to make it 17, 14-3, 17. That's a good lead. Well, 16-0 is a good lead. And that's another story. But we had some injuries we didn't normally have that year. That you don't normally have, it really slowed our progress. So we ended up 5-6, I believe. We played Alabama. They had us like 14-0 at halftime, or maybe 10-0, and we weren't moving the ball much, and they weren't doing great. Completely deluge, dark skies, and it poured all afternoon. And Coach Bryant, after the game, I forget what they beat us. I don't know what it was. We scored maybe 17-7, or 23-7. I don't know, something like that. But they were national champions, I believe, that year. And he was quoted in the paper the next day. He says, "We got to know each other well, and I respected him." I'd see Coach Bryant because he tried to recruit Bob. I got my first recruiting letters from Mississippi State and Barry Bryant at Kentucky. I was a sophomore or junior. He was still playing at Kentucky when I went to UT as a freshman. But anyway, he said, and he got to know, because he tried to recruit my brother Bob, the young one, very hard. And he got to know my mother and dad. At least I met him once or twice. He knew where my dad came from, knew about my dad's coaching, and about the older boys who'd all played. And he said, well, I came out, leading 10-0 at halftime. I saw that rain and those dark clouds. I kind of felt sorry for old Johnny. I said, I thought to me, no lady, I thought to myself, well, you old bastard, you're lying like hell. I wasn't quoted on that, but when we stopped the Lebanon battle, it lost 6 straight games, and his teams, and we lost 5 straight. Stopped in 1982 with a great shootout, 35-28, and it's just a heck of a game. And after the game, I've got a picture on my shoulders, leaning down to shake his hands. A lot of people have done that, but I'm looking back, I said I should have jumped off the player's shoulders, but they might not have let me. I should have jumped off and walked up to him like that. But as I went down, I shaking hands, he shows me shaking his hand, he says, Johnny, you had a great game plan. That was it. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, he knew how to take losing because he'd had his share of it. And that was good for me to be at Mississippi State, where we had a terrible record, but we went to a bowl game my 4th year there. Arkansas was 5-5 the year before. We won the national championship, 11-0 the next year. That was good for me at Iowa State, but I'd been with the bad teams, but I'd also been with the best at Huntland, at Tennessee, and we got to a bowl game at Mississippi. We'd always gotten to a better stage where I'd been, not because of John Majors, but because I was contributing my share, but other people were doing a good job too, and that helped me. But I would never given up. I'd never given up. We were 3-7 at Iowa State, 3-7, 5-6, and the 4th year we were 8-3-1. Went to the first bowl game in Iowa State's history. We were having our 40th reunion there, September the 10th, the first game at Ames against Iowa University. So we lost 3 games, 8-3, the winningest team Iowa State had ever had. First bowl game bid. We lost to Nebraska, Oklahoma, Colorado. That's the only time in football history, you've heard me say that before about Bowden White, Bobby Dodd, only time in football history, 1869, that one conference has had the number 1, 2, 3 teams in America. Nebraska was 12-0. They beat the heck, I believe, that year out of Alabama. I believe it was in the Orange Bowl. And Oklahoma was 11-1. They only lost to Nebraska. Colorado was 10-2. And Oklahoma beat Colorado one beat Auburn pretty bad in a bowl game.
It's Oklahoma.
Oklahoma. So we lost to those 3. And I had one of my players that we were in the top 10 at one time. No, Iowa State had never been there. And the polls were taken after the bowl games at that time. And we lost to LSU in the Sun Bowl. I had one of my former players, Merv Croker, good old country boy from Guthrie Center, small down in Iowa. And he said he was the last guy we signed my 2nd year, I guess. Jimmy Johnson, who became head coach for the Miami Dolphins and Miami University and also with the Dallas Cowboys, signed Merv Croker and coached him 1 year. So Merv Croker says, Coach Majors, he's a good old country boy. He said, Coach Majors, one thing I never could understand with Oklahoma, those 3 teams being number 1, 2, and 3, why we weren't number 4. I said, Merv, you got a good question. Now, if you want to go, you can. But I can tell you one about Dorsett and Horning in the Heisman, and one about Horning and me in the Heisman. Horning and our good friends, and I never resented him winning it. I'm not always a good sport, as I told you about competing with somebody else. I wouldn't do anything dirty to get it. I wouldn't do like the skater that tried to break Nancy. I might come close, but no, not really. Oh yeah. But once I got that, I never got myself built up too high on expectations. I always kind of underestimated what my expectations were, but tried to do the best I could. I never had to be told to hustle in football, basketball, because I loved it too much, and I wanted to compete, I wanted to win, I wanted to play, and I never missed a curfew. I've done a lot of things in my life I shouldn't have done, but I've never been put in jail, fortunately. And but I'll tell you what, I never wanted to get in trouble in college. I didn't want to miss curfew. I was afraid that might hurt my chances. I just didn't want to get in trouble. It wasn't worth it. And but I had some fun. So back to this. But a lot of Tennessee people would see Horning in the airports or something through the years, and some of his teammates would get on because a lot of his teammates are my peers too. Ron Kramer, who just died last year, is a great Michigan player. Green Bay guys. And some of them would say, Horning Majors should have, you shouldn't have won that Heisman. And he said, Majors should have won it. Well, he was number 1, I was number 2. Tommy McDonald, who's a pro and college Hall of Famer with the Philadelphia Eagles at a college in Oklahoma, was a great player. And we were all 3 in the same class. And Jim Brown was 4th, one of the greatest players of all time, period. Maybe the greatest running back in history. And he only played like 10 years in pro ball, and he quit to go to Hollywood. Big black guy from Syracuse. He was the greatest looking human being you could imagine. So Horning came down to see me the week we were playing Notre Dame in 1979, and he had his own TV show. So he set up an interview after practice, and I had my coaching outfit on, my sweatshirt, And I had my coaching hat on and whistle. And got through practice, and we started talking about serious stuff, about Notre Dame, Tennessee game, my preparations, whatever. What it was like to leave 2 years before from a national championship team in Pittsburgh to go back to my alma mater, cover serious stuff. And to keep in mind, Jim Brown came in fourth, one of the great players of all time. Horning was too, but this Brown was something else. So Horning was talking to me, like this, and he's talking to me. He said, "Now, Johnny," and all this other stuff. He said, "Now, Johnny, tell everybody, tell all those thousands of people watching us that you really thought you, Johnny Majors, should won the Heisman rather than Paul Horning of Notre Dame, right?" So he stuck it in my mouth like that. So he zinged me. I says, "No, Paul, I thought Jim Brown should have won it."